My name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. Now, this is Margaret of the past. If I remember to upload this at the correct date, it is months after I have filmed it. But today, I am reviewing A Lady to Treasure by Marian Ratcliffe. This is a sapphic regency romance that I just read, despite the fact that it is July and this book doesn't come out until October. But here we are. I got too excited. This is all about a young American woman named Louisa who has basically been told by her father that she needs to go to visit their family in England and find like a rich dude to marry so that they can help the family business. And she's like, okay, cool, because she doesn't believe in love because her mother left the family years ago. And so she goes and she hangs out with her dad's cousins or mom's cousins, or I forget how the family members in England are related, but she meets her cousin Eleanor. It's all fine, and then she meets the mysterious Sarah Davenport. And Sarah is a daughter of a nobleman, but their house is kind of falling close to ruin, and so she is on this desperate bid to save it. I did like how both of the women in this book are essentially responsible for a lot of stuff. Louisa is very smart with numbers and calculating costs and just that kind of import-export trade in general. And the book talks about how her father very rarely takes her opinions into account, even though he's making a lot of really risky business endeavors, taking on a lot of debt, that kind of thing. And then Sarah, who has basically taken over her family's finances, is very like hard-headed and stubborn and tends to get her way, but tends to go too hard almost. And so almost very early on, you can kind of see where Louisa can help Sarah with the numbers and the knowledge, but Sarah then has the gumption to like bluff through using the numbers to get the negotiations they want. Like early on, it establishes that these two just work well together in like an actual business sense. But of course, Louisa has to marry rich because she knows that her father's business needs capital immediately, and she's not very subtle about it. She's very blunt, and I just gotta marry a rich dude, and it's very awkward at times in that. But of course, as they spend more time together, their feelings start to develop, and almost a kind of resentment starts to build as Sarah, who has sworn to never marry, starts to be like, well, why does Louisa need to marry at all? Is she really willing to marry for money? Because at the beginning, like, Louisa doesn't care. She's like, yeah, love doesn't exist. I'll just go marry a dude because we need the funds. Like, she 100% does not care. So it is an interesting through line to follow where Louisa's like, oh, maybe I don't just want to marry for money. Like, maybe the personality actually matters here. But of course, with this, the big thing that I was worried about reading this book was, what about homophobia? What are we doing like a queer norm alternate Regency period? Are we dealing with it? And it kind of like walks the line. Basically, you have references to, women that live together, and Sarah especially makes references to knowing about these like down low relationships between women, which are historically sound. There are things like Boston marriages where two women would just live together and they would be quote unquote roommates. It was a lot easier for women to get away with back in this time period than men, because women showing various physical affections were a lot more accepted than men, and so you could basically fake being friends when you were actually a lot easier in this era. But it's definitely not openly accepting. However, you never really see any kind of direct homophobia, at least on the page. They're not exactly very open about it. Like, I think Sarah admits her feelings for Louisa to one other person, but they're also not like actively trying to hide the queerness. It's more like Louisa can't admit she has feelings for Sarah because she has to convince a dude to marry her, and Sarah's too proud and doesn't understand her own feelings enough to talk about them to anyone. She wouldn't talk about having feelings for a man to anyone. So it kind of splits the difference of, like, it's no homophobia on page, but also just, like, don't try to think about it too hard. Just let it lay. That kind of thing. And in general, I did like that aspect. I like our larger cast of characters. There are some side romances that pop up. We got some evil people. I think I wrote the phrase "fuck you, Joseph" in my notes no less than 3 times. But there's also some other, just a lot of annoying dudes. I did like how, if you look at the male characters in the book, the only male characters that are good for anything are all like servants or like soldiers, because this is the Napoleonic Wars. Like, no one else. Like, no one else. It's rich dudes need not apply. They're all assholes. Well, Mr. Lowther, I guess, isn't too bad, but the rest of them, no. And in general, this book was a lot more melodramatic than I was expecting. A lot more twists and turns, and obviously I'm not going to like talk about them in detail because spoilers, but it is kind of funny how it starts talking about like more low-key things like, business and the running of estates, and then a bunch of big twists happen. Now, the only reason that I could not give this a full 5-star is because there were several moments where there were these cool, like, surprise plot twists, but it only really did that in the narrative overview. Like, you would see a character leave for a long period of time. There was a lot of significant time jumps over the course of the story. Character would leave and then come back, and they would just tell you about this giant thing that happened off page. And for me, I kind of would have rather seen that. Granted, some of the things were like gory or involving death. There is an off-page suicide in the book, but just more of the drama, I guess, is the way I wanted to put it. It is written in that kind of Jane Austen style, but modern Regency romances really are their own thing, separate from Jane Austen. Like, Jane Austen was writing contemporary satire, and Regency romances tend to be played a lot more earnest than that. And so I don't necessarily need it to be specifically Jane Austen style written, although that seems to be what the author has gone for here. That just kind of lessened some of the impacts that a lot of those big moments could have had, especially when like you have this character that is such an antagonist and has done so much and so deserves their comeuppance, and they get a random, off-screen death. Like, that kind of thing. Like, no, that would have been satisfying. Like, so satisfying to see that character, like, get their comeuppance in real time. Like, you didn't have to show the death explicitly on page. You could just imply it. But, like, I wanted to see that. I wanted to see that antagonist get their comeuppance. And so in that way, I had to give this one 4 stars, but it is still very much worth it. I've talked about before how a lot of these Regency romances can just kind of, like, go right out of my brain, because if it's a very samey genre a lot of the time. There are so many times where I'll read a Regency romance and I could not tell you which one had which specific plot points because so many of them are so similar. So the very fact that you have one that is queer and is sapphic makes it stand out a lot more than it would otherwise. And it did stick in my head a lot more. It is a fade to black romance. I don't say clean, okay? That's too moralistic purity culture bullshit. It's a fade to black book. You do not see any graphic sex on page. So I know for some people they might be going, "Aw," but for others that might be more to your taste. I admit I low-key did want a sex scene, but I have other sapphic erotica for that if I need it. I don't necessarily need it from here. And again, it kind of goes back to the whole, if this is written in a Jane Austen type style, they weren't writing full graphic sex scenes back then. At least not in the majorly published works. I fully believe that erotica and smut has always existed, even in an underground sense. But Nope, not in this style. Regardless, I highly suggest this one, if for no other reason than it's sapphic. I've been having a really weird time lately. Again, as I film this, I might have turned it around in the months between filming and posting. I've been having a really weird time with sapphic romances. I don't know if I keep overhyping them in my head and then getting disappointed when they aren't exactly what I wanted them to be, but I've been struggling to find a sapphic romance that I really liked, and this one definitely hit the spot, so I would highly suggest this one for your next historic romance. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.